Here we are
We're,
again
we're back.
on a Soul Saturday.
Yeah.
How are you today, Rob?
Good. How are you? You
I'm
look
good.
beautiful as
Oh,
always.
thank you. I curled my hair
And
today.
we hope
My
you guys
little-
are doing okay out there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day. People are starting to get out. It's kind of weird still. It's no one wants to get close to anyone, but we're trying our best to go back to normal and at least be safe and take precautions. And that's all we best we can do. And just take care of the people we love and everyone around us.
So what's the topic for today?
The topic for today is something that I personally have endured in my life, and all of you can relate.
Not you.
It's called becoming an adult. And what this means is not, not just like working on your childhood and
Or
dealing with your family issue.
reparenting.
Yeah, we're going to be talking more from a individuation standpoint, not in a therapy standpoint. And I think for many of you, you may feel, this sounds like me. And we're going to talk about the Puella Aeterna, which is the eternal girl that we all have within us that sometimes runs our life if we don't become an adult. And we're going to talk about that process.
Yeah, definitely. We want to preface this by saying we don't see it as pathology in our work. Although we're talking about Jungian concepts and psychological concepts, we consider these more challenges than pathology.
Yes, that's a good point.
Especially since it's part of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to be young in the culture, and the culture, modern culture, essentially worships youth, and everything is about
staying young
and looking
young, and
forever,
being afraid. Go ahead. Sorry.
Forever 21. Essentially.
Yes, that store, Forever 21.
It's a store.
If you catch yeah, it's a store.
I was just thinking.
No, it's actually a store where they sell very sexy little things you would wear in high school or in your 20s. And you see some women in there that are over 21 still, having that kind of seeking to look young. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I think maybe just from a style standpoint, maybe, in the 50s, women dressed like they were their mother. It was like they didn't, once they got married in their 20s, they were already like the mother and wanting kids. And I think our culture of women have evolved over the years to be more independent, have careers, and then want to still be young and not be just the housewife.
I know.
Yeah.
I think we all want to be 25. When we're young kids, we want to be older. And then when we get older, we want to be younger. So.
Yeah, we can't wait to be able to drink and drive a car and do all those things. And so really the individuation process we're going to talk about today is really about becoming a woman, becoming a man, not staying, it doesn't mean that you give away your youth or don't look good or don't have fun in your life. And I think that's what I think people don't want to grow up because of that.
Right. But there's deeper, let's say, psychological consequences and emotional consequences to not really taking up the challenges of life.
Yeah. And so let's go into, so again, we said this is not about,
but we don't shy away from the deep stuff.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the deep stuff. So when we are younger, just in general, in the how Jung saw the world and psychology sees the development of a person, is that when we're younger, we're bound to the parents, primarily the mother. And we learn how to react emotionally based on that experience. And that emotional template is stored in us before we were 5. And then most of us, I'd say 99.9% of us, those who don't individuate, act out of that same emotional template unconsciously for most of their life. And that's that. So you're still at that child-like reaction to life is still there. And our intellect increases, we learn and we have cognitive learning and we are smarter and we go to school, but no one ever teaches us how to develop the emotion. And so becoming an adult is really, first of all, taking responsibility for your life, and also understand and kind of graduating from that old template of the emotional reactions and responses that we've been kind of knee-jerked into, the triggers that we have, and how we face the world. So how would you describe the Puella Aeterna
Yeah,
and the
so
Puer Aeterna?
it definitely comes from Jung, but one of his pupils, Marie-Louise von Franz, really developed the idea because she started seeing a lot of people that were kind of stuck in their early development in her own practice. And so she started studying the concept and writing about it. And she defines it as somebody who's stuck in their teenage years or adolescent years.
Why are you looking at me?
We all kind of go through those phases, but when you get stuck there, meaning that you don't want to go to the adult level, right?
You don't want to grow up. Peter Pan?
The Peter Pan syndrome, the Tinkerbell syndrome, the Puella Aeternus, the eternal girl, or the eternal boy, the Puer Aeternus. They're people that just want to remain in that adolescent stage. No responsibility, no real commitments. The world to them appears too restricting, too confining. They want to be free to do what they want, to travel, to enjoy their life, but without taking that step into real commitment to career, to relationships. And of course, we all go through those phases, and there's nothing wrong with it. But then you get into your 30s and 40s and even 50s and 60s, and you're still doing that. That's when it becomes problematic.
And just from the standpoint of to check in to see if you're a victim to the Aeternus, is so here's some of the ways it shows up. It shows up as kind of like you're complaining about the world. You feel like the world isn't fair to you. You're not getting what you need. Think about it. That sounds like a child would say, mommy's not taking care of me. And the kind of like nothing's fair. There's kind of an unfairness. A very famous Puer Aeterna is, we were talking about this morning, is, I don't know if you've ever seen The Crown or know the story of Princess Margaret and the Queen Elizabeth, is that, Queen Elizabeth was the older sister, so she got to be the queen. And Princess Margaret was the sister that had to not have all the glory. And through the first season, she was just like kind of always like complaining that she didn't get what she wanted, and she was like reckless with relationships, and she really wasn't taking responsibility for her life, and kind of jealous of her sister, who had actually had to force to grow up at a young age. To, I think she was in her early 20s when she became queen.
Talk about taking responsibility.
Yeah. And so you see that like the one is forced to become the mother of the country, and the other one is kind of just kind of not accepting her role, but also complaining about it and feeling it's like this powerlessness that I can't get what I want, helplessness. And we feel like we can kind of be that in relationships, where this guy didn't take care of me, or this person isn't the person I thought they were. And then we kind of hang on to also the, kind of the economy's not working, or the government. And it's kind of like this, no, I'm not taking any personal responsibility, and the world is supposed to be better than this. And it really comes from that early age, because as a kid, we do need to depend on our family and our parents, because we don't have the capability. But emotionally, if we're still acting that way in the world as an adult, we can't get in control of our life.
Yeah, and the mother relationship, I would say, is at the heart of the Puella and the Puer, because for the man, if he over-identifies with a mother, he's a mama's boy, essentially. He's overly dependent on the mother. maybe never moves out of the house,
Mhm.
or tends to go back and always be there and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
He's never really able to assert himself in the world.
Mhm.
For the woman, it's often the reverse. It's when they reject the mother, or reject the role of the feminine model that the mother's presenting.
Mhm.
Then they're tied to rejecting that feminine element in their life, and they see growing up as getting into that rut that they saw their mother being in.
So I always think of the relationship with the mother as there's 3 levels. And I see this show up when we asked people, when we did the Mother's Day, mother archetype, we asked people like what the relationship was. And there's either I love my mother, and you have that relationship, that extreme where you talk to her every day. You're overly dependent on one extreme of her opinions. You want to be like her. You put her on a pedestal. You listen to her advice. You don't make a decision without her. You kind of feel like you're still like in the apron. Was that the apron strings? You're still tied to
the
apron strings. And then the other end of that spectrum is where you totally reject her. So there's a total like she's the best or she's the worst. And both of those extremes, a lot of people think, well, I rejected my mother. She doesn't affect my life anymore. But the fact that you reject her, you're giving that energy, and you are giving her more power in your life because you're giving it energy. So those are the 2 extremes. And then the third one is where you're somewhere in the middle. And this is kind of where most people are. They have their mother in their life because they feel like this, well, she's my mother and I got to love her. And so you have that kind of conflict with, I love her, but she annoys me and I want my freedom, but I don't want to let go of her. And that ambivalence of, I want to have that connection, but I don't want her to kind of control my life, but I still am dependent on her. Like there's some kind of entanglement there. So it's not an outright rejection. It's not like an overly praise, but it's that kind of middle, like complex, that enmeshment of that, almost like you're entangled with it. Like you can't let go, but you love her too, and you don't want to let go. And why do you think people have that kind of relationship? Is it because we're taught that you're supposed to love your mother, and it's like that kind of she represents security to us, and like hanging on to that kind of relationship gives a sense of security?
Well, there's that, but I think that life is hard, and the more complicated it gets, the more complex society gets, and the more ambiguous the process of becoming an adult gets, the harder it is for people to really become an adult in the sense, because there's no mechanism for it. Ancient societies, or let's say traditional societies, they had these rites of passage where there was no adolescent stage. You were a child one day, and then you went through this initiation and you became an adult. Now you were considered an adult by the tribe. And
so we created a third, like a new phase, which is adolescence, which is where everyone stays. That kind of like boy crazy, girl crazy, want to have fun, want to rebel.
No responsibility,
but it's still kind of an adult.
Yeah, you want all the privileges of adult, but you don't want any of the responsibilities.
Yes, yeah.
And that's essentially what defines the Puella and the Puer, that they want all the privileges of adulthood, but they don't want any of the responsibilities, none of the hard work.
Just like Princess Margaret, she wanted to be included in all the decisions, and she wanted to be a part of the royal family, but then she also rejected the family at the same time by marrying the photographer and some other she wanted to marry a guy who was divorced, and it was like a whole thing. And so like she wanted to like rebel.
In your history, what you've told me is you moved to Colorado at a certain stage.
Yes.
That is kind of finding your own challenges.
Yes.
You step out into the unknown. You accept this as a challenge to, you're not sure you can do this, but you're going to give it your best shot. That's a kind of rite of passage.
Yeah.
You go off to a school, or you go off to a new city, or you take on a big challenge in your life that proves to you, you're kind of testing yourself. And as you go through that process, you mature into it.
It's interesting. I don't know if I ever told you this, but before I moved to Colorado, the last relationship I had was like a year and a half, and he was living with his parents, and he was very enmeshed with the mother, and like mama's boy, and was had issues with the dad, but he was kind of like still a child and didn't want to commit, and that's why I left, because I was like, I'm ready to grow up. And so our relationships tend to reflect. If we're not ready to grow up, we'll tend to reflect. We'll see that in the people that we date. They're kind of non-committal too, or they'll be too mature, and then we're like, oh, they're going to control us, and they're going to take over our life, and they're going to make me grow up. And so we have that conflict with that. And I see this too with people that want to start their own businesses as well. Yeah. It's like, I want to just stay under mama, the corporation mama, under that wing, and afraid to step out and really become. And I think the most important thing for me in that transformation and finally growing up is that I had to really let go that my parents screwed me up. And that is a tough thing, because some of us had tough childhoods. Some of us had, still have stuff they haven't resolved within themselves. But as long as that stuff is there and you use that to blame why your life today is not doing well, you're still stuck in the past, and you're living from the past. You're not living in the future. You're living from the past. And it's just unconsciously, what you think your parents did and did not do for you, you're going to reflect that on the world. So your mother, if she didn't love you enough, if she was too critical, then the world is going to be that way to you, and relationships are going to be that way. The money's not going to flow in because no one is there for you. And we tend, I think in our society too, we talk about being young, but it also glorifies, like, there's so much out there about the kind of the baggage of our childhood, and let's talk about it all the time, and and forgive our past, but it's just, we're still kind of digging it up and still making excuses for why we don't have the things we want. And one thing I noticed that since we've been together is I stopped blaming, and you catch me when I do, blaming my father or my mother for why things happen. Because sometimes I'll catch myself saying, oh, I please because that's what my mother taught me. And it's like, no. I please because I'm choosing to continue. Now I'm an adult. I'm taking responsibility. It's not my mother's problem anymore that she demonstrated a certain task or trait that I mimicked or I carried on. And so that's becoming an adult. It's like stepping into that.
Yeah, a lot of people make this mistake. They think because now as adults in their middle life or adulthood, they have a good relationship with their mother. Mm-hmm. So they think, I've resolved all the issues. But that's not the way it works. Essentially, the impression that you got very early on and what was going on in the family early on, like the first 6 years before you started first grade and all that, that impression is what you internalize. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. You're not really dealing with the relationship with your mother. You're dealing with your internalized mother archetype.
Yes.
And that's what you need to understand.
Can you say that again? Because I think that is so profound. That we're not really seeing our mother. Like the idea of our mother that we have in our mind is not really who she is. It's who we believe she is, like our perception of that is. And every child in that family carries a different internal image of their mother.
That's right. That's why you see siblings from the same family have a very different relationship with their mother, because it's the internalized structure of the psyche that you're dealing with. You have a kind of a slot for the mother already in you. That's what you call the archetypes. And so
it's like a empty file, and then you're born, and then it's like, okay, let's fill it up with.
Yeah. And so that's what you're relating with. And the impressions you get very early on are emotional impressions. They're not like cognitive strategies or
beliefs, like beliefs, I'm good enough or anything like that.
Well, they kind of have that because an emotion tells you the meaning of the world.
Yeah, that's true.
The meaning of the situation.
But it's not just a thought, it's an emotion.
It's not a thought, it's an emotion. And so it colors the thoughts. It colors your perception. And we know that the way you perceive your mother and the way you relate it to your mother very early on is the way you relate to the world.
Yes.
And in relationships especially.
So if you reject the mother, you're rejecting the world. And it'll feel people that say, like, I can't stand my mother. She was terrible. I don't talk to her anymore. You have to come to terms with whatever that is, not to forgive her, because I think forgiving is just saying she screwed you up and giving her more power, but coming to terms with what do you want to create in your life, like almost like a new mother. How do I, kind of create an image of that I want consciously of the mother archetype versus the one that's default? Because if you reject her, you're going to feel the world is against you all the time. If you reject the mother, and it may not be on the surface, it may be just subtle, like that kind of feeling like nothing ever works out for me. The mother, I'm never, the world is never giving me love and appreciation or acknowledgement or comfort. And so it comes in different ways.
Yeah, thank God it's an archetype, because otherwise we'd be stuck with whatever we experienced with our biological mother. But because it's an archetype, that means we can reframe it, rework it. And the process, of course, is to become conscious of what happened in those early periods and what are my emotional assumptions about my mother and the world. And it's really not a mystery. If you understand that principle, the way you see the world is really reflecting back to you what's in your unconscious mind. So like you were saying, if people complain, if they blame others, or they blame their parents, or they blame their situation for,
like, I got my money issues from my mother, and my family was poor, so have a hard time making money.
Yeah, any of those things, that's pointing to a kind of an unresolved mother complex.
And you keep giving energy to it.
You keep giving energy to it because you're seeing it outside, and you're thinking, well, this is confirming what my beliefs are. But it's the other way around, that you're seeing those things because you have those internal belief structures.
And that's we're conditioned in the beginning to whatever our senses pick up, we start to accept as real and assume that because we weren't, we're babies, we're just emotional beings. And so we get this template. And then as we grow older, we forget that we decided all those things. But the event that happened is always neutral. And we're the ones who decided. I'm the one who decided I wasn't worthy. Here's it's kind of a story about my dad, but I remember one time my dad, I felt like he rejected me, or I hurt his feelings, and he spanked me that day. It was like I was like, oh, I said the wrong thing. And until I was 41 years old, I called my father up, or I told my mother about it. And I said, I had this memory come back. And she said, oh, that was because you were climbing on something. And I, as a kid, remember that memory. I was like 3 or 4. And I thought I was being punished for saying something else. And so we misinterpret our world all the time as a child. We make up the worst case. Like you worked with children, and you said that the children will take the worst on themselves. They if parents are fighting, they blame themselves. And so much is embedded in us that isn't really, it's an assumption that we made of what was happening.
Very much so. And it's very powerful because the emotions are really the way we create meaning. So it gives us the meaning of who we are in the world and what we expect from the world.
And our experience of the world, because everything's emotional, whether they're happy, sad, scared. We're always responding emotionally to the world. And if we didn't have emotions, we wouldn't be able to enjoy the things that we love of the world too. You couldn't have relationships and activities that we love and creativity and all those things. So it's kind of like we have to live with it, the emotions, but we don't have to let them drive anymore.
Yes. So keep in mind, we're not talking about pathology, but we are talking about human suffering. If you do not take up the challenge of life, if you do not accept that that challenge. And a challenge simply means this, that you're not sure you can do it. If it's something that you're sure you can do, that's not a challenge. It has to be something big that you say, I'm not sure I can do this, but I'm going to try. Yeah, you're going to push yourself. You're going to test yourself.
Like me moving to Colorado, I just felt like that was a big leaving my family. We all grew up in New Jersey. I had a big Irish Catholic family. We would get together every week. It was very, very close. And then for me to just pick up and leave to go to another state, I don't even know what possessed me, but I think I needed to leave the nest.
The other part is that you have to do it on your own.
Yes.
Now, there are guides. There are people that help you. It's like a teacher. It's like a second parent, a second mother, or a second father. But they're there to just give you the kind of a direction, to point at the moon, in a sense, not to help you, not to do it for you. And you have to break away from the mother, not reject her. Because rejection is you're still caught up in it. You're still very much caught up in it. Breaking away really means kind of finding your own self.
Yeah, not reacting.
Yeah, not pushing it away, because pushing it away, you're still caught. You're still entangled in that umbilical cord.
So it's like redefining yourself as a woman and becoming your own self, your creation, versus a response to your childhood.
And that's what the Puella really gives up, is the ability to really become herself, which is individuation, to really find her true center.
I find for me as a woman, and I don't know how it is for a man, but it's an energetic shift that happens. When I was a Puella, I was Fun Debbie in my early young age of dating and crazy, not taking responsibility. I was still like acting like, Prince Charming's going to come save me, the Disney movie one day, and then not wanting to be tied down, like wanting that children and a family, but also fear of being tied down. So it was that conflict. And I was still I was immature. And there was something, I think it was when I broke away to become a hypnotherapist and left the corporate world, when I really made the big change, is I started to really take responsibility. I was the one responsible for bringing in the money now. It wasn't just my employer, it was me. And I had to grow up and I had to face so many challenges that my mother never taught me how to face. I had to basically find inside of me the divine mother, the wisdom within me, to find the answers of, how do I act this way? How do I become this other person that's a teacher, that's a coach, that's a helper of the world, and an entrepreneur? I had no framework for it. So I love what you said, is like breaking away and doing something you can't do. I think it's almost like you have to become someone different than the parents told you or conditioned you to be. It's like stretching where there's no template, and and the thing is, there is a universal template of anything you want to create. It's, you have to kind of choose it now. Like, I want to choose to become the teacher. I want to choose to be a woman in love. If your parents didn't have a great relationship, your mother never had a good relationship, I choose to be the woman who's loved and adored. Like, there's a new template, and I need to face what's in myself that's stopping me from having that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
How about for men? What was your experience like? Did you feel the shift, like energetically? I felt more grounded, more in control. I felt left like I was bouncing around, like the world was kind of bigger than me. I felt like I was kind of leading in the world versus the world telling me what was possible.
Yeah, it is stepping into your power and realizing that you can survive on your own, that you can make it. And not only survive, but thrive and create yourself, or recreate yourself. Many of the rites of passages were framed as a rebirth. The child dies and is buried and no longer exists. And often you were given a new name and a new identity because you become somebody else. You become your individuated self.
And
Now,
I became the Debbie Lama. My friends started calling me the Debbie Lama.
And,
I wasn't.
Like everything that we talk about, it's a spectrum.
Yes.
On the extreme end, we do see people that are completely crushed by their experience with a mother.
Mm-hmm.
They might have a mother who is narcissistic or depressed or really crushes them, doesn't let them breathe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're smothered in essence, and they're never really able to take off and form their own identity. And so that's the extreme essence. Most people are in the middle, right? They struggle with it, but then they find their way. Sooner or later, they find a way to assert themselves and to create their identity apart from the mother.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then there are people who like you who study it,
mm-hmm.
right, who make it part of their life's mission to really study what is individuation about and how do we really enact it and then teach it to other people, which is the best.
And yeah, so it's not about reframing your childhood and building up your ego to have a better ego. And maybe you're, instead of not feeling worthy, saying, I'm worthy. It's about really transcending the identity that you were conditioned to become someone completely different. I feel like a friend of mine told me, like, you kind of like step into a new experience, like you become a new person. And if our bodies recreate itself every 7 years, why do we hang on to this little identity that we had when we were little? Why do we keep hanging on to it and feeling like, oh, my life is ruined because I got a bad start? Where can we grow up and mature and say, you know what? I'm not what happened to me. I choose to create my life. I'm free to choose who I become. And that's Carl Jung. He really believed that anyone can change. And we have this ability with individuation. It's not about fluffing up the ego, forgiving the parents, doing gestalt with them and, saying, Mommy, I love you, and giving a pillow a hug. It's now going to, I acknowledge my past, but I'm going to go to the next level now versus pushing it away. Or buying into it. You're kind of saying, I understand. I know I have that default, but then I want to go to the next level.
Yeah. For men, it's pretty much the same. The challenges are a little bit different in that we're dealing perhaps with different challenges, but the military sometimes serves as that kind of rite of passage. For me, it was the same as you, kind of going out into the world by myself. And you're scared, obviously, like we were saying, it's got to be something that's really challenges you. And so you're scared, right? Because you're not sure you can do this on your own. But you accept the challenge. And in accepting that challenge, you find yourself.
I had a dream right before I moved to Colorado. This is actually very interesting, thinking about it, how our dreams are showing us. And my brother had moved like a couple months before to Florida. And so he left New Jersey. And I was thinking about moving to Colorado. And there was a dream where my brother and I died. And there were like these strings on top of the coffin. And I woke up in the coffin thinking, I'm still awake. I'm still alive. And I was trying to get out of the coffin. And I said, I still have a life to live. I still have a life to live. And my mother was there and she said, oh, Debbie, you need to just stay there because we already paid for the funeral. And, we paid for it already. So you have to die. And so it's this kind of like the mother archetype was saying this, and death is transformation. And so that was my dream right before I moved to Colorado. So it's like interesting how our dreams show us the path that we need to take. And so we need to understand what they're saying. It's not, oh, there's my mother again being, responsible, but it had such a deeper meaning. And so our mind is constantly, our psyche is constantly feeding us the path where we need to go through events in the world, symbolic events, and then also dreams that guide us. And those of you who are here, you're here for, there's something here for you that you need to hear.
Yeah. And then Jung talks about deeper levels of it, or higher levels perhaps of it, which are the spiritual elements of this. Because if you think about what you're doing through individuation is you're leaving the herd, not only the family and the mother, but you're breaking away from conventionality. It's not about conformity. It's not about doing what everybody else is doing. It's about finding your individual self. And often you have to be willing to give up what most people think is the right path and find your own.
And, I think about what choices I could have made younger age of going to marriage or staying single. And I feel like I resisted marriage because there was a part of me that didn't want to fall into that same trap. Like there was a part of me that seeked individuation. So I resisted commitment. So it's not a bad thing. It's like a lot of times we think, oh, well, I have blocks to love and you got to fix them. But it's like it was meant because when I was ready for what I really wanted, I had to go through the journey I did. Or I could have married my high school boyfriend and had, lived in New Jersey and never had a career and stayed at home. And my whole life would have been safe. And maybe, the society would say she's successful because she got married. But I took the harder route and it was heartache and all those things. But, I want everyone to know that if you're having trouble in anything in life, you have to see it as these things that you're trying to work out. You're not settling for less. And so when we have those conflicts in life, that it's just reflecting the conflict within ourselves, and the divine in us wants us to have so much more than our ego feels that it wants to have. It doesn't want to just be a carbon copy of your mother or father and live what the herd wants you to live.
I know. If you think about it, we're a contradiction. We have animal bodies, right, that are subject to the laws of physics and this kind of animal nature. At the same time, we have this incredible imagination and mind that connects us to divine thoughts and divine kind of a sense of life. And to reconcile those things, often people can't find a way to do it. They ignore perhaps their dreams and their imagination and their deeper instincts, and just focus on work, right? They drown it out with work, or worse yet, with alcohol, and just kind of living that unconscious life. So there's a lot at stake in thinking about these things. And that's why we wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, this is such a juicy subject, but we always have juicy subjects. But the Puella Aeterna, it really is it's just something that people need to recognize in themselves. And I think my life changed when you mentioned Jung's theory of the relationship with the mother is the relationship to the world. And I always felt like the world was a very trustworthy place because I trust my mother was always there for us. Like she never, ever let us down. But she also had this kind of conflict of like kind of feeling like she had to please in order to get the world to cooperate. So I got both parts of her. And then I can't blame my pleasing on my mother did this to me anymore. I have to say, well, I've decided that I'm deciding to carry on this pattern now. I know it. And now we can consciously choose to leave it, but it's not her fault. And, one of the things you talked about yesterday, you and I, we have all these talks all the time. And can you imagine our household talks all day long? And you talked about this idea that there is no perfect person. Like there's this idea in psychology that there's a functioning normal adult somewhere that we can say, this is a healthy adult and everyone should be like that. But where is that?
It doesn't exist. There's a whole debate in clinical psychology about what's normal, what normality is.
Yes.
And the existential psychologists say, well, if you're trying to fit into a society that's dysfunctional, because we know societies, they're not the healthiest way to live in the world, then what does that say about your mind, right? What normality are you aiming for? To be dysfunctional, to be neurotic, to be a workaholic, or that kind of,
or just be married. Like, oh, if you're married, you're normal. And I used to think that, and I know a lot of the women I've worked with over the years, it's just a kind of stigma if you're single, there's something wrong with you. You're, outcast of society. And if you look at the world, it really does. The culture is, there's people that idolize singles, but if you look at the reality shows, it's all making fun of single people, like The Bachelor and The Love Is Blind. It's like all these crazy people that can't find a relationship. There's something wrong with them. When I feel like look at the people that settle and not really have the passion and love that they really truly want. Who's better off? And so I don't know. I love this conversation about that there is no normal, and that we're all just human, and our parents were human, and they, we have this expectation that should look like the Brady Bunch or something, or I don't know. Am I dating myself? What's the proper the most modern family now?
So a Puella, an eternal girl, can get married and have children and still be a Puella, meaning she hasn't really individuated and accepted her challenge in life.
Well, I was mentioning a lot of times the mother wants to be best friends with the daughter. So like the teenage years, the mother's still hanging out with her, and then the daughter turns 21 and they drink together and they party together and they go on trips together and they do this. And she kind of wants to live through the daughter still. Like she still wants to not be the mother role and play the mother. She wants to be her best friend.
Right. Or she wants to live through the daughter. She wants, she wants the daughter to do all the things that she didn't get to do.
Yes.
And that puts a burden on the kid, an unfair burden on the kid.
And then if your mother was a Puella, then you're kind of you were never had a framework for the woman, and maybe the grandmother was, and there was always probably a conflict between the mother and the grandmother, because the grandmother was probably the opposite, the mature one. And so we always, when we look at we do shadow with the generations in our programs, and a lot of times we see they flip-flop as they go down, like generation to generation. And so you might align more with your grandmother than your mother, and so on. Interesting how women pass that down. And I guess the men have the same pattern.
Oh, absolutely. And like I say, the institutions have really failed us. Jung used to talk a lot about the Catholic Church, how it had the potential to really play that role of initiation into the spiritual life, at least. But he says even the church has failed. It plays out a lot of the rituals, but it lost its meaning. It doesn't connect with what's going on in the world. The educational system, we can see it failing, and it's not able to really educate people as complete whole creatures. It just focuses on reading, writing, and even that, sometimes it fails in that. Marriage as an institution, some people might say it failed too.
50% divorce rate.
Divorce rates are pretty high, and then people are doing it differently, right? They're living together or finding new ways to do that,
or having thruples. 3 people.
Governments, a lot of corruption, those kind of things. So all institutions seem to be falling apart, and that's why we need to have this conversation.
We need to grow up. I mean, if you look at even just now with what's going on with politically with the virus, it's everyone's acting like children on Facebook. Like it's like children. It's like, whiny, yelling and getting in fights with everyone, and there's no voice of calm and reason. It's just kind of, I mean, there are some, wisdom. There's some wisdom, but you see a lot of that kind of back and forth and immaturity in the culture.
Well, there's definitely, that's a whole other conversation, right? Social media. But in general, the internet has kind of opened up this whole new bag of can of worms for us. It has great potential, just like every technology that we have. It depends on how we use it.
So I think, the best way that's why we do what we do, is because we feel like individuation, and the way we do it in a coaching model, is it gives people that ritual and that initiation. And I was telling one of my clients a couple weeks, 2 weeks ago, she just had gone through the shadow and had a big transformation, and she's starting to see things more clearly. And I said, "Oh, you're one of us now." She was like, "What does that mean?" And so it's that kind of you're growing up, you're kind of ready to take on your dreams, ready to take on that powerful soul relationship that you want, the career of your dreams. You're really ready for it now because you're initiated into yourself. And what you're really true, because you can't really create from the Puella. You can't. You're just going to repeat the patterns.
Yeah, and this is not a new idea. In Buddhism, the Buddha's reported to have said something like this, that those that don't manage their mind, they're like children, he says. They're essentially reacting out of that initial imprint that they got from the mother. Very kind of very low level understanding of what the mind is, what spirituality is.
And I remember when I was doing hypnotherapy, it was all about the inner child work, and you got to, heal the child. And I think what we need to do, if that helps you, that's fine. But that only kind of builds up the ego. What we want to do is we want to become someone else. We don't want to just like repair the little girl. We want to become the woman. And the woman who we become, the template isn't from our past. It's from the deeper, we were born with it. It's this bigger you that you were born with that didn't get to be expressed yet. And so I want you to think about that. Think of that wonderful dreams you have, these aspirations for great love, aspirations for a great career, for changing the world, all those things. That wasn't taught to you. You can kind of identify it even now. Like what's part of you is not something that your parents taught you. That's what you reach for. That's what you do. And it's, again, not pushing it away, but you thank your parents especially your mother, for giving you life and for, the challenges that you had to go through. And then that initiation into who you really are. And that's really your true self. That's what we talk about. It's not maturing up the little you. It's actually becoming something completely different.
Yeah, it is about transformation.
Yeah. And so that's what we do. Yeah, we have some exciting things coming in July. We're going to do a retreat live. It's going to be a paid retreat, so we're going to be doing it on Zoom. So we'll be announcing that soon. Getting a little pre-registration going for that, where we're going to work with the emotions. And those of you who want to teach this, we still have our life coach training that is available. It starts June 17th. So we still have some spots open. If you're interested in joining our June cohort, the registration's open. You apply, ask us about it. If you haven't seen the links everywhere, just say, "Hey, I wanted that link to that life coach training, 6-month program where you actually go through the process yourself and also be able to help others," because we feel like that's the most sacred service that you can do in the world, is help someone really step into who they really are.
I want to look at some of these comments and questions.
Yeah, we got a lot of comments here. So let's go. Hello, everyone. Forever 21 clothes barely cover anything. A lot of them are just one piece of clothing. Yes, I know. I'm new here. I think due to men and women have been driven to prioritize youth, being thin, being smart, yet one step behind men. Also seeing fathers' unfavorable treatment of our housewife mothers made us run from femininity and value stoic logic and corporate jobs like our father. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm. And then, but happens is though we're still, even though we think we're taking on that masculine role, I have a lot of clients that deal with their female bosses that are so immature that they're kind of like bullies a little bit. So the mean girl. So there's that kind of, you become the mean girl boss. That could happen too.
Yeah, because when you're playing a role that's not genuine, then you have to overcompensate. And so it's like they're hyper male. They're all the bad parts of being a man, and they're trying to emulate those things. and that doesn't work. Women have to find their own centers and their own way of being in the corporate world.
This has been big for me. All the adults growing up never had any fun, all work, and I match up with men who are involved with their mother, feel like I rejected the feminine as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Anything you reject, you're going to attract in some form or another.
Including in relationships. So if you reject your mother, you're going to attract a man who loves her as a mother. So it's like a mirror sometimes, the opposite. And so it's about it's looking at every relationship in your life as a reflection of your own psyche. That didn't happen by accident. It's like you wrote the script for that.
The good news is you can change that through the process of individuation.
Yeah, and let's just go on this because there's a couple of questions. What do you mean by feminine element when the woman rejects the mother? What happens to the woman that rejects the mother? So as women, we have both masculine and feminine in us. So as a woman, we're an anima, we're the feminine, we're expressing that. So if we reject the mother, we're rejecting like ourselves in a way because we're women, we identify as a woman. So all those things that women, and not socially, but more of an energy. The women are intuitive, they're creative, they're emotional, they're caring, they're kind of the nurturers, the relationship helps the relationship. And so a woman that rejects the mother may have a hard time with relationships, maybe not dealing with their family, with their emotions. And so that would be a way to reject that femininity, the ability to process emotions and share emotions. And
yeah. And this is all going on unconsciously.
Yes. Because you could feel like you're so emotional,
right?
But you're not really able to share them and deal with them in a mature way.
Yeah. And the way the Puella is described is that she's sometimes hyper feminine externally.
Mm-hmm.
She's very seductive, perhaps, very charming and witty and the life of the party. But any hint of really getting serious about her emotional life, she runs away from.
Mm-hmm.
Anything,
So she can be sexy and fun, and
that's right, and social and all those things. But when it comes to the real intimacy, the real responsibility of having a relationship, she'll run from that.
And if you think about when you reject the mother, you're actually saying my mother, like you're mad at your mother for something, that you're giving your mother power that you need to reject her for. So you have to ask yourself, well, what am I rejecting? Why does she have power over my life today? I'm an adult. What am I carrying still that I feel like it's her fault? And as long as it's someone else's fault, something outside of you, you can't fully embody your own feminine power.
Yeah.
You're giving all that power to your mother. Even in rejection, you're giving it to her.
Yeah.
You think you're taking it away, but you're actually giving it to her.
Yeah. And when we reject something, we're splitting it off from our awareness, from our consciousness, but it doesn't go anywhere. It simply goes into the unconscious. And then we project it externally.
Mm. It can be hard when you have a damaged Puella mother as well. When you break away, can you trigger wounding and abandonment? The choice becomes harder, but so necessary, getting to the other side. Yeah, I see this this concept. I have a kind of a random, like a radical concept about childhood and wounds, is that we were never really truly wounded because our ego actually created defenses against it. So what you're really calling wounds or those things are what's left over is just your defenses against it. So you're the one actually has power because you designed stay away or not trust, or those are actually prevented you from truly being harmed. But we label those defenses as wounds, but they're actually a sign of a healthy mind. So I really want to just underscore that when we call them wounds, it's a powerless place to be. It's like, oh, they hurt me, and you're implying that there's something external that can harm me. And that is like, as a child, it feels that way. But a woman becoming an adult says nothing outside can ever harm me. So imagine if you didn't think anything could harm you, you wouldn't be afraid of making money or taking risks in business or starting your own business or asking for someone to care about you or standing up for what you want, you wouldn't worry. You would have more power. But if you approach it as, oh, I'm a tender, it's very careful, scary world that has power over me, then
it's a very subtle change, but it's really important because nobody can really hurt the true self in us.
Yes.
No matter what happens. And that's really where our power comes from.
That divine woman, the divine man that we were born with, that archetype is our potential. That's always been there. And it's nothing in our childhood could ever impact that. It's that it covers up that, our conditioning and our emotional template covers up what our potential is. And individuation is saying, okay, I see this kind of construction that my ego made for me to survive. And the second part of life is for us to step into who we're meant to be.
Yeah.
Becoming an adult. You decide who you become, no matter what kind of start you had. Paid for the funeral, someone's laughing. In accepting the challenge, one activates the process of stepping into the true self.
That's right. It's a challenge. And instead of seeing our past as these wounds or obstacles or traumas, we simply see them as fuel for the process.
So this is a good comment. Shows I still have some work to do with this. I saw the title about adulting and felt triggered, like it would be about how I'm not there yet or meeting all these standards. But instead, it's the opposite. I don't ever have to be this outside standard of getting there. It's personal and not about society. Yes,
that's right.
It's your own journey. You get to decide what an adult is, but you want it to be your choice. There's no, you can't. If you want to hang on to your childhood, that as long as it's a choice, you can. If you want to call your mother every day and be really entangled with her and love that, and as long as it's a choice, as long as you're not doing it because you feel like you're going to die if you don't. That's the difference. Like there's no rule of what it is. You get to decide that. If you are not good with mother, how can you accept her?
Well, remember, it's an internal archetypal structure that we're talking about. So we can always accept part of ourselves. It's our nature, really. It takes more work to keep it split off. Really, the reason we're exhausted often is because we're expanding so much energy trying to keep the shadow elements away, the unconscious elements. And so letting go is really an easy process once you understand what's at stake, that your adulthood, your power, your ability to do things in the world really depends on you letting go of those past assumptions and integrating them. Integration simply means that we become conscious of them, not judging them, not pushing them away, not buying into them, just seeing them for what they are.
Yeah, it's not like healing it. It's saying, oh, I see what it is, but I'm going to choose otherwise. And we have more information about what's going on unconsciously. And now that it's conscious, and until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll direct your life. So it's about choosing and making. So this is what I haven't understand all the work I did. If she was not a good mother, how can you accept her and your womanhood and become mature? I think we just answered that. So I really need to understand the rejection more, how it can affect my life. And I have another one too. So we can maybe answer them together. I feel like I'm going to no contact with my narcissistic mother, help me in my individuation process. And my choice to do that has helped me, but is that rejection? And I want to say that I think a lot of people confuse individuation as taking action. Like a lot of people think, because there's that cognitive behavior, like if I think differently and act differently, I get a different result. That's kind of the basic self-help, but it's more of an internal thing. You could still act externally and do what you need to do, but the simple external act doesn't mean that you resolved it internally. So you can cut someone off and they're still in your head. You're still thinking about them every day. You're still hating them every day. It doesn't mean that you're totally cut off. So it's really, you have to check in and say, how can did I truly let this go? Like, can I just accept that I have to accept her, not that I think accepting isn't that you approve. I think a lot of people think I accept her, so I approve of her.
Right.
You can just accept that's, she had her things, but I no longer choose to live my life with that.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Because narcissism or whatever's going on with her, it's not her choice. Essentially,
Yes, I love that too.
any one of us in her place would react the same way. We don't really act out of free will most of the time. The only time we act out of free will is once we individuate.
Yes.
Then we're acting out of free will. But before that, most people, they're simply acting unconsciously, and they're responding and reacting to their conditioning.
And so most of us didn't have parents that individuated. So I'm glad you brought that point up, because it's so true. It's like just like we said, there's no perfect normal person. Our family, our parents, and they all had issues. They were raised by their parents. And if you have kids, you've done things to your kids, I'm sure, parenting them in a way that probably wasn't perfect. And so how are we ever going to resolve all this? We're messy with our emotions. We're messy with other people. We step on people. We hurt people. We don't try to, but we do. And if we can't accept that and forgive ourselves, we're never going to we're not going to let anyone else off the hook either. And then by the yardstick we measure others, we measure ourselves. So if you hold your mother up, she wasn't perfect, you're going to put yourself up to that perfection. I know a lot of people talk about, my mother did this or my father did this, and then they have such high standards for themselves and they don't give themselves a break. In their life, they make a mistake, or they're not going through the process fast enough, or they had a trigger and it's going overboard. It's things aren't working out the way they want. They messed something up. They broke up with the wrong person. It's all that kind of self-judgment, because we have to accept that our humanness, but there's more to us than that. And so if we can accept it in others, we accept it in ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good one for another.
Yes,
another
I know
call.
so much. So here's we're going to get off, but we have our mentors here that are going to answer some questions. We'll be on later today. If you're listening to the replay, feel free to post questions. We'll post a separate post after this video if a fresh one, so we can have fresh questions. I know this is a juicy topic, and how do you let go? And I think letting go is just it's not forgiving them. It's not buying into what they did. It's actually finding out who you are outside of that.
Yeah. Thanks for all the great questions. Thanks for hanging out with us. We appreciate it.
And we will see you next week for another soul session. And we hope this helped you be more clear and become an adult today. And just one piece of homework is really tap into this part of you that is leaning to something else. Knowing that there's aspects of you that you didn't get from your family. That's your true self. Like what is that freshness in you? That inspiration, that something that sets you apart from them, that maybe they think you're weird because you are that way and you're different. That's really getting close to who you really are.
All right.
Take care, everyone.
We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.